B'shus harabonim, b'shus l'mer da'asra shlita, v'chol hakol hakadosh hazeh. It is a great honor and a privilege to address this august group who has gathered this evening b'chleidah shel Torah to participate in honoring the legacy of one of the great pioneers of Yiddishkeit in Baltimore and America, Harav Again, Rabbi Avraham Reisich Tzadik Levracha, on this, his 150th yahrzeit. We must first gratefully acknowledge the Achsanya Shel Torah, the host shul, She'erit Israel. This is a Beis HaKnesses which has been graced by outstanding Rabbanim. Most personally for me, Rav Shimon Schwab, who is a very close Rav of my family, my parents, and the extended family for many years. In fact, my father, Zechariah Levracha, used to learn in Ner Yisrael in the late 1940s, and he would tell me how he would be invited very often to Rav Schwab's house for Shabbos, and Rav Schwab would call the yeshiva, and it was actually something that he would dread, because once they were sitting down after the gefilte fish or the soup, he would get grilled by Rav Schwab on the sugyas that they were learning, and so he really didn't enjoy too much going to Rav Schwab's house. But on the other hand, they did develop a very close kesher, and they stayed close until the Washington Heights years and beyond. I would like to express hakaras hatayv to the Marid Asra, Harav Again, Rabbi Yaakov Hapfer Shlita, whose reputation precedes him, for graciously housing and embracing this evening's important gathering. The generous sponsors of this evening, to whom we are all profoundly indebted, are Dr. and Mrs. Robert Lehman, Mr. and Mrs. Gorian Rosendorf, Mr. and Mrs. Ellie Schlossberg, Mr. and Mrs. Yitz Siegel, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Storch, Dr. Leon Strauss, and Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Weil. The corporate sponsors are Goldberg's New York Bagels and Hamadia newspaper. The shir tonight is dedicated for Shalema, for Binyamin Shlomo ben Chana, and Chaya bas Esther Malcolm. Events such as these do not happen by themselves. Months of planning, publicity, and prayer must be planted in order to reap such fruits of success that we see here this evening. The Kinnis was the brainchild and masterfully spearheaded and orchestrated by Rabbi Alexander Weil, whose passion for Meseres Ashkenaz in general and Rabbi Avraham Reis in particular is truly inspirational. May all of his endeavors be likewise blessed by the Rebbeinu Shalom. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of descendants of Rabbi Reis who are here this evening, the Rosenbaum family of Monsey, and others, the Rosenberg family of Monsey, who are here this evening, and it's a big schus, it's a big kavod that they have made the trip here in order to give kavod to their great Savior. This evening is bittersweet for me. It's sweet in the sense that it's such a beautiful knessia of anoshim and noshim that come together to give kavod to somebody that has been gone for 150 years. It's amazing. But on the other hand, it's a little bitter for me, or perhaps a lot bitter, truth be told, because my father, who was one of the pillars of the Meseres Ashkenaz, he was one of the great sponsors of many of the svarim that deal with the Shloshim and Hagei Ashkenaz and the yeshivas in Germany and the Würzburger Rav's Torah, who I will describe soon. My father and I were very close, Baruch Hashem, and we were planning, since this event was originally planned, we were planning excitedly to go together to Baltimore and to be here tonight as one. Unfortunately, my father's condition He was suffering for about 17 months from the Yana Machla, and his condition worsened, and Metzotzim Gedalia, he was taken from us. Ve'inena kilaka chayser lekim. May the shir tonight be an eloi for his heilige neshama, which I miss so dearly, and I hope you are shepping nachas tonight in Shamayim. As you know by now, I serve as the Mashgiach Ruchani of Beis Medrash L'Talmud Lander College for Men in Queens, New York. When I accepted this position some 11 years ago, I was anticipating delivering shmuzin, giving musar badin, being engaged in counseling the young men who are the Talmidim of the yeshiva through this very interesting period of life where many of life's decisions have to be made, the Beis Medrash age. And that's what I was thinking, that would be my job. But shortly after I began being a mashgiach, I realized that there was an entire component to this. There was an entire component to this position, to this shtala, that I had not anticipated. And that is that the phone began ringing from mothers and young ladies finding out information about the boys in my yeshiva. Apparently I was a reference on their quote-unquote resume, and these calls came fast and furious, and especially during supper time. You can ask my wife. One night, not very long ago, I received a call from a young lady who herself was making the call inquiring about one of the young men in the yeshiva. And she asked a litany of questions that most of you have probably either asked yourselves or read about. And most of those questions are actually true about the plastic tablecloths and about scraping dishes and all these things. These are actually, there's a lot of emes to them. But this young lady asked me a question, and it took me back a little bit by surprise. She says, asking about this man, about this young boy, she says, is he the type to change the world? So I thought to myself, first he should start trying to change his shirt now and then. That was the first thought that occurred to me. But it began my thought process into thinking about how this is an important element to many people. A lot of people, some people ask it beferish, but I think a lot of people think it or dream about being a person that changes the world. Being a person who's able to leave this world, Achamei v'Asim Shana, a different and a better place. And why do people want to do that? Why is it that a human being has such ambitions to go and change a world, or to better a world, to repair a world? So psychologists would probably attribute it cynically that the person has a messianic complex. He thinks he's Mashiach or she's Mashiach, and she wants to, or he wants to do something that will change and save humanity as we know it. But I don't look at it that way. I think that there's a very chashuva element when a person has such ambitions to change a world. And it comes from being daima l'shchina. We know that there is a mitzvah of alachta b'dracha. We're supposed to emulate the Rebbeinu Shalom. And whatever the Rebbeinu Shalom is, we are supposed to try, b'zer anpin, to try to emulate and copy. And perhaps strive for these midas of the Rebbeinu Shalom in any which way that we can. And just as the Rebbeinu Shalom, we learned 2 weeks ago, was the Bari Olam, he created the world. So too, everybody, I believe, has that in the neshama. They too want to build a world and change a world and better a world because they want to be Daim L'Shchina. The question is, how do we accomplish such a thing? I'm not going to take a vote or ask for a raise of hands if anybody actually has such ambitions. Although I did once in yeshiva and I was surprised how many boys actually raised their hands. But how does one accomplish such a monumental task to change a world in any way? And I think we have to go to the beginning of Brias HaOlam, to the beginning of Sefer Bereshis, and I think there we will get a clue and a glimpse as to how a person could do that. At the beginning of the Torah, as a backdrop to Sefer Bereshis, the Torah says, "V'ha'aretz haisa sayhu v'avayu," that the earth was sayhu v'avayu. In New York, this works. There was utter nothingness, and then Hashem began the work of Brias HaOlam. Rashi says on this pasuk of Sayu Vavayu that Tayu, last time, Tayu is a lashon tema u'shemamein sha'adam Taya u'mishtaimen al bayu sheba. This funny lashon of Tayu Vavayu, Rashi says that a person is Taya, that's Tayu, he is astonished, and u'shemamein, and he's baffled. Man is baffled and astonished over the void within it. What that means is that when you see a world, if you would see the world before the Rebbeinu Shalom began creating it, a person would be baffled by the void, by the emptiness contained therein. And the question is obvious. To who is Rashi referring? Who is this Adam? Adam Taya u'mishtaimim alabayu shabai. Man is baffled and amazed and astonished by the emptiness in the world. There was no man yet. There's no man until Yom Shishi. This is still at the beginning of the world. There was nothing. Who is this Adam that's Taya u'mishtaimim alabayu shabai? Who is this man that's baffled by the void in the world? The answer to this question, which we'll get to in a few minutes, I believe answers this call that we may have inside, how to change a world. I remember a long, long time ago, I took a marketing course. It was a marketing 101 course, and the professor, the teacher that was teaching this course, the very first class that he taught was trying to illustrate the power of good marketing. And he used a mashal of a shoe company who wanted to expand their market share of selling their product, as all companies do. So they send a salesman to a native island somewhere in Yehuppitz that really no one, there's just very primitive beings, primitive people that are walking on this island. And they send this guy there in the hopes of maybe perhaps getting some extra market share, getting some business out of this island. He's there for a few days. He sends back a telegram or a letter to the company saying, "I'm on my way back home. There's absolutely nothing to do here. Everybody walks around barefoot." So he comes home, and the company sends a different salesperson. And the salesperson goes to the island, and he sends a letter back a few days later, "Send 1,000 pairs of shoes. Nobody here wears shoes. Everybody walks barefoot." There's two different ways of looking at things. A person could either look at something and say, it can't be done. It's impossible. Look at the Metzius. Look at the facts on the ground. They show, they illustrate, they demonstrate that there's an impossibility here of accomplishing something. But there's another approach to life, and that is that when we look at something, we don't see the impossible, but we see the void. We see the absence. That's it. I'm done. We see the absence, and from that, it's fine. It's okay. It's fine.
People aren't hearing. You better go. Ignore me.
They see the impossibility and they do not cower, but rather they rise to the challenge and they decide that that is going to be their calling. What is missing is not something that is impossible. What is missing becomes their challenge. If I may quote Winston Churchill, I think he's kosher enough that we can quote him in Beis HaKnesses. He once said that an optimist sees opportunity in every calamity, while a pessimist sees calamity in every opportunity. That's the difference between two approaches to human beings in life. Some people say it's impossible, I can't do it. But the people that rise to the occasion are the people that see opportunity in a calamity. When they see something that's missing, when they see a void in life, that's precisely what they set in their crosshairs to change and to fix and to make. I believe that is what Rashi perhaps is trying to tell us at the beginning of Sefer Bereshis on this pasuk of Sayu Bavayu. Just like the Rabbeinu Shalom created a world in a vacuum, Yesh Me'ayin, it was so empty, it was so void, but the Rabbeinu Shalom created the world that we see around us in spite of that emptiness, in spite of that void. When we want to follow the Rabbeinu Shalom's Brias Ha'olam, and we want to be daima to the Rabbeinu Shalom Kaviyachal, Adam Taya U'Mishtaimem Alabayu Shaba. We, that's the Adam that Rashi is talking of. We, Adam, we have to also look in life for the things that are bafflingly empty, the voids that are not being catered to, what's absent in the world. Find those gaping holes and plug them up and fill them, and that is how a person could be daim l'shchina. That is how we build a world. We build a world not when we see already a world existing, but we find something that does not exist, and that is where we strive and we try our hardest to build up what is lacking. That's what Rashi means, Tayu Bavayu Adam Taya U'Mishtaim Alabayu Shaba. We want to be builders like the Rabbeinu Shalom. We have to be Taya U'Mishtaim when we see something that's not being done. We can't just say, look, there must be a good reason for that. Perhaps perhaps this was our calling in life, to accomplish this mission of filling the void that is empty until us. There's a famous Gemara in Yavamis which describes how the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva were niftar 24,000 between Pesach and Atzeres, between Pesach and Shavuos. And Rabbi Akiva, who we know the story of Rabbi Akiva and how he was able to be maimed these Talmidim, to build up these Talmidim, and now he lost them. Rabbi Akiva would have been excused if he would have said, I tried my best, I did what I could, I retired, I give up. It's not get benched. Clearly the Rabbeinu Shalom has other plans. But instead the Gemara says that even though the world was shamen, the world was desolate of Torah, there was a void. After these Talmidim died, Rabbi Akiva went and he took a handful of Talmidim. Some Medrashim say 5, some say 7. And he went, and these Talmidim, these 5 Talmidim, were the ones that were maimed Torah on that dar, and we have Torah today because Rabbi Akiva went and he taught Torah to 5 Talmidim, Yechidim, individual Talmidim, just a handful, and they were able to do what the 24,000 were supposed to have done. And the Alter von Kelm says that from this Gemara we see that sometimes just a few people are able to build and to change an entire world. I'd like to mention tonight, before we get to Rav Reisech Tzadik Lebracha, I'd like to mention a few other examples of builders in recent history, people, individuals, Yechidim Mamish, that built up Torah in the world as we know it today. Reb Chaim Volozhiner lived from 1749 to 1821. He was the Talmud Mubuk, the greatest Talmud of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was the Amud of our Messiah. We do nothing without the Vilna Gaon. All of our Messiah that we have today and all of the yeshivas in the world come and stam directly from the Gaon. Believe it or not, the way Torah looked in the times of the Gra was not as we perhaps envision it. Torah was on a very steep decline. Very few people were learning Torah. The yeshiva Avraham were very few and far in between. There were no formal yeshivas. There were little batei midrashim, little shtibalach, and the Rav would take a few talmidim and learn with them. But there was not, as you would think, thousands and tens of thousands of bnei Torah in Europe at the time. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner saw this gaping hole. And he said, instead of writing the obituary for Torah, which many people had done, he said, I'm going to build Torah. I am going to make a yeshiva, which is a structured beis medrash with a Rosh Yeshiva and with Rabbeim, and there's going to be places for the Bachrim to eat, and places for the Bachrim to sleep. This was, for us today, we take this concept for granted. But this was Reb Chaim Volozhiner's revolutionary idea. I heard from Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, when I learned in Yeshir and Kol Torah, he once was speaking about Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and he said the following story. He says that Reb Chaim Volozhiner, when he had this great idea to start Yeshivas Volozhin, he went to the Gra to get his Haskama. He needs his Rebbe's Haskama. He didn't do anything without the Rebbe, without the Gra. So this was something that for certain needed the Haskama, the Michtav Bracha of the Gaon. And he thought that the Gaon would be as excited as he was about this great project that he was embarking on. He went to the Vilna Gaon, and he was really all excited. This is what's going to save Klal Yisrael and Torah, and this is what we need. And the Vilna Gaon was very cool to the idea. He says, I hear, come back in 6 months. Reb Chaim, as you can understand, was not too happy with this response. He was hoping to right away, start the project and start getting the fundraising together and getting the Rabbeim and getting the Bachrim and getting everything, already up and running. 6 months' time to put this great plan on hold to him was something that's unfathomable. But it was the Rebbe. The Rebbe said to do that, and you can't question that. 6 months to the day, he came back to the Vilna Gaon and he says, Rebbe, he says, 6 months ago I came to the Gra with this project of building this yeshiva in Volozhin, and it's going to be able to save Torah as we know it. I need the Rebbe's bracha and askama before I embark on this project. And the Gaon says, you have it. I give you my bracha that it should be matzliach. And Reb Chaim couldn't resist. Couldn't just walk out of the room. We had to ask the question that we're all asking.
Why 6 months?
Why 6 months? Why would it be that the Gra would put this great project on hold for 6 long months? And so he asked. And the Gra said something that was very instructive to all of us with our plans. He says, a lot of times a person has a great idea. And, you wake up and you have a brilliant brainstorm of an idea, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to start a gemach, I'm going to start a Bikur Chaylim, I'm going to do a Chassidus Kala organization, a lot of huff and a puff. And then you give it a couple of days, and reality sets in, and you realize you're too busy, and it's fundraising, and it's stamping envelopes, and it's stuffing envelopes, and it's just a lot, and you're just soon, just rather leave it. The Gra says to the Reb Chaim, he says, I was afraid that it was one of these flash-in-the-pans ideas that you're going to be excited, and then a couple of days or weeks later it's going to be fafal, and you're going to just basically abandon the idea. I set for you a target date of 6 months. If you're able to maintain your enthusiasm for 6 months about the idea, like the first day that you came to me, now I know that it's going to have bracha in it. And that's what happened. Reb Chaim started the yeshiva of Volozhin, which he would head 5 years after the Ptira of the Gra in the year 1802, Reb Chaim sent the famous Igeres HaYeshiva. Not to shamelessly promote my book, but if anyone ever has a chance to see the Sefer Great Jewish Letters, I have this letter. Not only do I have the letter in English, but I have pictures of the letter. The actual manuscript itself that was sent to all of the communities throughout Europe, inviting them either to give money to the yeshiva of Volozhin, to send Talmidim to Volozhin, or to start in their own communities. Rosh Yeshivas should start their own yeshivas to save Klal Yisrael. And we know what happened to the yeshiva of Volozhin. The yeshiva of Volozhin was the Aim HaYeshivas, or the Avi HaYeshivas, whichever term you prefer. It was the mother of all yeshivas. All of the yeshivas in Europe and Ad Hayayim could be traced directly to Volozhin. If you come to my sukkah, I have a poster in my sukkah that says on it the yeshiva world, and it starts with Volozhin, and it goes down, and it has a tree of all of the branches of all the great Ashkenazic yeshivas, Ad Hayayim, and how they all are able to stem directly from Volozhin, from this idea that Reb Chaim Volozhiner had to save Torah. That's what he did single-handedly. One Yachid was able to literally change the landscape of Torah in the world, and we're all here because of it. And he did it because instead of saying, look at Torah is being lost, let's forget about it, it can't be done, he saw the Tayu. He was Taya u'mishtayim malabayu sheba. We can't let this happen. How could Torah just evaporate, Chalila? Torah needs a kiyum. There's Abtacha from the Rebbeinu Shalom that la yamushu Sefer HaTorah zeh mipi zarcha ad olam. And so he saw, and he was perplexed, and he was astonished at the void that needed to be filled, and he didn't assign it to anybody else. He did it himself. He himself made it his duty to build a world as the Rebbeinu Shalom built his world. Frau Sarah Schneer, the founder of the Beis Yaakov movement, she lived from 1883 to 1935. She was a simple seamstress from Vienna. And today we take for granted Beis Yaakovs all around the world, Baruch Hashem, but that wasn't always the way it was. There were yeshiva bachrim that were being produced from Volozhin and from the yeshivas that came from Volozhin. But in terms of girls that would want to marry these yeshiva bachrim, there were kemat none. They were very swept up in Rachmana litzlan, in the Haskalah, which was very strong throughout Europe. Many of them were questioning whether or not they should keep Shabbos or not. They would go to the theaters, they would read the books. This is what they were busy with. And they were not into the same thing that the Talmidim of Volozhin, V'amistoyet Mehem, were interested in. And so she got up and she went to get the Haskama of the Gedolim of the time, the Ger Rebbe and the Belzer Rebbe and the Chavetz Chaim, and they all warmly endorsed her, and it was not a simple thing. Today we think, of course they would endorse her. There are a lot of opponents to this concept. Women should not be getting a Torah education. That's something new in the Messiah. How can you start something that was never before? But the Gedolim recognized this need, and they signed on to it. And my daughters tell me stories. My daughters are young, and they're in Beis Yaakov, Baruch Hashem, in Queens. And the Moras tell them about Sarah Schneer and how she would walk in the streets and certain detractors would throw stones at her because it was such a controversial move to be able to start a Beis Yaakov movement. In 1918 in Krakow, she opened her first Beis Yaakov with a class of 25 girls. And from these humble beginnings, her school grew into an educational network that by the time of her Petira, at a very young age of 52, it boasted more than 200 schools attended by some 25,000 students all across Eastern and Central Europe. Again, somebody who was Taya u'mishtayim alabayu sheba. You see something that's lacking and you don't say, well, there must be a good reason why nobody else did it. That's not what somebody that's an optimist or somebody that's a builder thinks. That's what a pessimist thinks. An optimist thinks there's a reason. I see opportunity in the chaos. I see something for me to accomplish with my life because nobody else is doing it. And this is what the Yechidim of the Dairas were able to do. After Churban Europe, again, the world of Torah was Shomim. The best and the brightest of Klal Yisrael were Nargo, Al Kiddush Hashem. Europe was empty. It was Mamish Shomim. There was no one there anymore. Either they were murdered, or they were in hiding, but they were not. There was nothing really in Europe anymore after the war. Very little. In Eretz Yisrael and in America, that today we see the phenomenal growth of Torah. Yechidim Mamish, individuals built what we have today. In Eretz Yisrael, there were two individuals that built the great Olam HaTorah that we see today, burgeoning in Eretz Yisrael, the Kailim and the Beis Yaakovs and the Yeshivas and the Chadarim. Who do we attribute that to? There were two people. There was the Chazon Ish, and there was the Ish HaChazayin. The Chazon Ish, we know, Rabbi Avraham Yeshaya Karel, the Gaon Adar, the Manig of Klal Yisrael, never had a yeshiva of his own, but he was the accepted leader of Klal Yisrael. Everyone was machnia, humbled themselves before the Chazon Ish. And the Ish HaChazayin, the man of vision, was the Panovich Rav, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Bracha, Rav Kahanaman, who came after the war from his city of Panovich. Panovich, he was the Rav and the Rosh Yeshiva, and he was the leader of a very prominent Kehillah that were Nagara Kiddush Hashem. And instead of getting despondent and saying, it's over, I'm retiring, I give up, like Rabbi Akiva, he went and he was Maimed Talmidim. He bought a parcel of land in Bnei Brak, and he decided to build a yeshiva that was the largest yeshiva, that would be the largest yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And this was a time that Hitler, Yimach Shemai, was about to attack Eretz Yisrael through Ramel and the desert fox, Yimach Shemai. And Klal Yisrael were nervous and they were trembling about their very existence. They thought that they would be rolled right over by the powerful Nazi forces that were on the threshold of Eretz Yisrael. And on the very day that Ramel was about to come, and because of the great Rachmanis, the Rebbeinu Shalom, he ended up not coming. That was the day of the Anochas Even Apina, the cornerstone laying foundation in Bnei Brak, where the Chazon Ish was present. The Panovich Rav was crying into the cement that he was mixing to be able to lay the cornerstone. Tears were coming out of his eyes, tears for the Churban, tears for all of his Talmidim and his Mishpacha that perished in the Mulchama. And the Chazon Ish says that a Chanukas Habayis, a Anochas Even Apina, that you serve schnapps and herring at, says it's questionable whether or not that will be Matzliach or not. Says, but if you cry by the Anochas Even Apina into the cornerstone, that's guaranteed success. Hazorim B'dima Barina Yitzayru. Those that plant with tears will reap with great song. And that's what happened. Eretz Yisrael, all the Rosh Yeshivas today in Eretz Yisrael, Kimat, are all Talmidim or Talmidim of the Panovich Rav and Rav Shach and Rav Pravarsky and all the great Ge'ainim, Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, the great Rosh Yeshivas of Panovich. We are standing in Eretz Yisrael because of them. Yechidim. In America, also, pure Shmamim. After the war, there was very little going on here, as hard as it is to fathom. Yechidim came, such as Rav Aaron Kotler, such as Rav Shagafayel Mendelovitz, and others, but Yechidim. And they came and they were, Midu Torah B'Yisrael Shah, they established Torah here, because again, they were Toyo Mishtayim Al Shabbat. They couldn't understand how we could let such an opportunity pass. We must build. We must roll up our sleeves and plant Torah again. These are the builders. These are the great Yechidim, as the Alter from Kelm said, in the footsteps of the great Rabbi Akiva and his Talmidim, who were able to take a world which was Shamim, a world that was desolate, and build new life on these shores and in Eretz Yisrael and throughout the world at a time that everybody else wrote the possibility off. And now that we have this background, we can discuss a little bit the great Gaon, Rabbi Avraham Reis, Tzadik L'Bracha, whose yahrzeit was today. We have to give a little background to who this great Gadol was, who built Torah here in Baltimore. And the shul that we daven in, the shul that we're sitting in right now, we'll soon see was the direct influence and responsibility of Rav Reis. It's not that far away. It's not so distant. 150 years seems like a long time. But it's not when you're able to sit in a shul that's one dar away from Rav Reis. Rav Avraham Yosef Reis was born in a city called Gadsheim, which was near Würzburg, Bavaria, in the year 1802. He first studied under Rav Avraham Bing. Rav Avraham Bing lived from 1752 to 1841. Him together with the Chasam Sofer, with the Talmidim of Reb Nosson Adler. Reb Nosson Adler, HaNesher HaGadol, was the Gadol in the world at the time. You can imagine if you have a Talmud like the Chasam Sofer, you must be pretty big yourself. Reb Nosson Adler was somebody that the Chasam Sofer did not leave. Wherever the Reb Nosson Adler moved to, the Chasam Sofer was with him, like hand in glove. He could not part from his Rebbe. So, Rabbi Avraham Bing was also in this yeshiva of Reb Nosson Adler, together with the Chasam Sofer, and he himself had a great yeshiva in the city of Würzburg, and he was the Rav of Würzburg. So in this yeshiva of Reb Bing, he had a few very prominent Talmidim. He had the great Aruch Laner of Yaakov Ettlinger. It's impossible to go into any yeshiva, and when they're learning the Mesechtas that the Aruch Laner is on, that is not the most worn out Sefer Akron on the shelf. It's amazing that a Yekish Gadol with a lumdus of any of the Eastern European Gedolim, and that they're so mekubal in all of the yeshivas, regardless of which yeshiva it is. The Aruch Laner is the Aruch Laner. That was one Talmud of Rav Avraham Bing. Another Talmud of Rav Avraham Bing was my great-great-grandfather, the Würzburger Rav, who was one of the prominent, preeminent Gedolim in Germany at the time, and perhaps one of the greatest poskim in the world at the time, Rabbi Moshe Bamberger. And also, Rabbi Avraham Reis was also a Talmud of Rabbi Avraham Bing. After the yeshiva of Avraham Bing, he went to a yeshiva in Fürth. There's a very old, historic yeshiva in Fürth, many, many hundreds of years old, with the most prominent Rosh Yeshivas. In the time of Rabbi Avraham Reis, his Rosh Yeshiva was Rav Wolf Hamburg. Rav Wolf Hamburg lived from 1770 to 1850. He was the acknowledged Torah authority in Germany at his time. He wrote two Svarim, Shilas Tshuva, Simlas Binyamin, and the Sharas Zakanim, and in which Shilas were asked from all over the country, all over Germany, and he answered them all. It's interesting, just as a side note, I know that Rav Binyamin Hamburger addressed the Kehillah in Baltimore, I think last year, 2 years ago maybe, and he is a world-renowned scholar. He has an organization called Machon Moreshes Ashkenaz, which was, he took it upon himself to be mamshech the Messiah, to perpetuate the German Ashkenazic great legacy. And my father asked him to write a sefer on this yeshiva in Fürth, because my great-great-grandfather, just like Rav Avraham Reis, they both learned in this yeshiva by Rav Wolf Hamburg, this yeshiva in Fürth. So my father had in mind to write for him to write a kuntras about this yeshiva in Fürth. And this kuntras turned into like this fat 3-volume set of svarim that was just published about a year ago. It's called HaYeshiva HaRama B'Fürth. And my father was like, truth be told, he was like getting a little bit upset. Because he said, no, when is it, first of all, he wasn't feeling well. He wanted to see his parents. But it didn't stop. And somebody told him, when you have a fat cow, you keep milking it. And so, he was he was on the payroll, so he didn't stop. But that's Rabbi Bamberger is a phenomenal Talmid Chacham, and he wanted to put out a davar that was sholem and be mevarach al mugmar. So he put out 3 volumes of gewaldige work. If you can get your hands on it, it's kedai. But this outlines all of the Rosh Yeshivas in the history of this yeshiva in Firt. And Rabbi Hamburg was one of the prominent ones. And he had these Talmidim, such as the Wurzburger Rav, and of course Rabbi Avraham Reis, who became a Talmid Muvik. He got smicha from Rabbi Hamburg. And Rabbi Hamburg was famous for being a very staunch opponent of reform. Germany at the time, of course, was under the spell of reform. Reform was taking hold in very many corners throughout Europe, Bechlal, but Germany, Befrat. And one of the staunchest leichamim, opponents and warriors in this Milchamta Shel Torah to do battle against the reform movement that was on the rise was Rabbi Hamburg. And he fought tooth and nail against them. And he also infused in these Talmidim, my great-great-grandfather and Rabbi Avraham Reis, how you have to be able to be loichem this Milchemes Hashem and not allow them to get a foothold in anything. A short time after leaving the yeshiva in Firt with a smicha, he served as Rosh Yeshiva in a private base medrash of a wealthy man in the city of Tzell. However, the rabbis in Germany, the Rabbanim in Germany, realized that there was a lot of immigration of German Jews to America at the time, and they didn't want them to be katzayin ashein lahem raya, like sheep without a shepherd. They understood and they recognized the need to have somebody that was strong and smart and responsible at the helm in the United States of America. So they talked and they insisted that Rabbi Avraham Reis should go to America in the year 1840 and take a leadership role and be able to spread Torah in the most genuine form, fight against the reform, and also be able to give over a chinuch, an emistic chinuch, to this new generation of people coming to America from Germany. There was a large flood of immigrants at the time from Germany to the United States. After 1825, they came primarily because they were undergoing great economic hardships, and a lot of the advances that Napoleon had made for them were beginning to be repealed by certain German rulers that were victorious after 1815. The population figures indicate the size of this movement. In 1825, there were 6,000 Jews in America. By 1848, there were 50,000, and their number reached to 150,000 by 1860. So we see how quickly an influx of Yidden were coming from Germany directly to America. So one of the spiritual leaders of this migration, one of the pioneers of Torah in America, is Rabbi Avraham Reis. He came to New York in the late 1840s, and he found spiritual chaos here. It was a virtual Dodge City. It was a no man's land in terms of Yiddishkeit. It's so hard for us to imagine this today because Baruch Hashem, New York, and all these Kehillas, Baltimore, etc., they're Irveim B'Yisrael. But at the time, it was barren. It was mamish shamim, to the degree that he would say that in this country, men who have studied neither Chumash or Gemara have assumed the title of rabbi, donning the rabbinical cap on their heads in the same way that Napoleon placed the crown on his head. There was absolutely no way to certify who was who. Anyone that claimed to be a rabbi printed up a business card. He was a rabbi and people would follow him. And whatever he would espouse, people would buy it, regardless of whether it was emes or sheker. That's what the state of affairs was when Rabbi Reis came to these shores in 1840. First, he was advised to go to Newport, Rhode Island, where there's the famous Turo Synagogue. He went there. He found that it wasn't a place, it wasn't a community that he could really, take root in. It was more of a vacation spot as it still is today, and it wasn't really a cohesive Jewish community to accomplish much with. So instead, he went back to New York, where he met a landsman of his who convinced him to go to Baltimore, where there was a shul by the name of Congregation Nidchei Yisrael. This shul, Congregation Nidchei Yisrael, was established in 1830 by a group of German Jewish immigrants. And in 1841, Rabbi Rice became their first Rav and the only Orthodox rabbi with smicha in the entire United States of America. As soon as he came, he saw the problems that were festering in America. What was taken for granted in Germany, in the cities that he lived, here was a chiddush. Shmir Shabbos was something that was at a very low state. People were not keeping Shabbos that frequently. There were a lot of people that came to these shores and basically threw off the oil of Shabbos. And other things followed as well. The German Reform movement began arriving, and they took a lot of neshamas away from the Fruma Yidden that were there at the time. Rabbi Rice tried as hard as he could to stem these problems. He himself was fielding questions. Shilas, he became the Paisek of America. People were sending him shilas from all over. Are you allowed to use an esrog, a West Indian esrog? Is that kosher or not? And he paskined about that. He paskined and he wrote down all of the names of cities in America which are critical. How you write them is very important. For Gittin and for Ksuvas, you have to know how to write certain names and on which river it is, on which body of water it resides. All of these were questions that were put to the capable hands of Rabbi Rice. When Isaac Lesser, the famous Isaac Lesser, was publishing the Orthodox publication monthly in English called The Occident, Rabbi Rice helped him. Rabbi Rice wrote beautiful and very impressive articles battling reform, showing the importance of a unified Orthodox body in America. He was a proponent of making a unified Besdin for the entire country. It's interesting that there was a movement afoot to make Rabbi Rice the chief rabbi of the United States of America. He was that great a personality that he had a hekif on the entire country in many aspects because he was a renowned Paisek on all corners of this country. Wherever Jews resided, they sent him their shilas. But in spite of all of Rabbi Rice's efforts, the rising tide of reform could not be stemmed, and it proved to be too powerful even for him. Even in his own shul in Baltimore, this Nidchei Yisrael, there were a lot of problems. He at first did not want anyone that was in Mechal Shabbos to get an aliyah, but there was pressure for him to change that policy. And even when he had to, he made a takana that nobody should answer Amen. When Mechal Shabbos gets an aliyah, you should not answer Amen. But that, of course, was not greeted too kindly by a lot of the misfaulim, by a lot of the membership. And that caused a lot of friction and hostility towards the Rav. In addition, the congregation began to try to force him to change certain things in tefillah. A lot of the holy, cherished piyutim that the German Jewry had, there was pressure on him to revoke and to repeal and to delete a lot of these piyutim, and that was the final straw, which was interesting to me. You know, you think Shmir Shabbos was the final straw, but if you know and you lived with people that were of German descent, you know how chashuv the siddur is, and how chashuv the tefillas are, with all the piyutim and all the krivitzes. It's something that you live and die for. And that was the final straw. As soon as they even suggested to take out the piyutim, Rabbi Rice resigned from his kehillah. In 1849, instead of compromising, he found himself without a kehillah. So he continued to live in Baltimore, and he started a grocery store and a dry goods store. In the meantime, he organized a private minyan. It was known as the Howard Street Shul. which eventually expanded and became this very shul that we sit in this evening. She'erit Israel is a direct child of Rabbi Rice when he founded his own little private minyan. This was an offshoot of that. This was a descendant, as it were. The shul that we stand in, this beautiful makom of Torah and Tefillah that embraces us this evening, is directly because of Rabbi Rice. It's incredible. He wrote a letter to the Wurzburger, to my great-great-grandfather. And it speaks a little bit to what he was going through, the turmoil that you can imagine that such a gadol had to live with under such duress on these shores. I dwell in complete darkness without a teacher or companion, he wrote. The religious life in this land is on the lowest level. Most people eat tarfus and desecrate the Shabbos in public. I wonder whether it is even permissible for a Jew to live in this land. And at the end of the letter he wrote, nevertheless, Baruch Hashem, in my home I conduct myself as I did in my former days in my native country. I learned Torah, Yomam V'Layla, he writes. And my God-fearing wife is always by my side. Rav Rice was very concerned with chinuch. And he established, believe it or not, the very first yeshiva in America was his. When he opened up his yeshiva, he made a speech, and he warned in that speech that without Torah chinuch, if you're planning on sending your children to public school and you don't send them to a Torah-dik education, to a Torah-dik makom of Torah, lo yizacher shem Yisrael b'America. There is absolutely no future for Torah in America. Torah will absolutely vanish from these shores. You cannot have a community without a yeshiva, because you might have the old-timers that keep to their minhagim and their mitzvahs, but what happens to the children? And he said in that same drasha, Meniach ani kol umna sheba'olam, ve'eni melamed es b'ni ala Torah. I will give up, I will forsake all of the umnis, all of the professions of the world, and all I desire to teach my children is the Holy Torah. This was Rabbi Rice. Rabbi Rice established this shul. He established chinuch in America, the first yeshiva. He was the first paisik in America. He planted seeds. And it's true that objectively speaking, or subjectively perhaps, in his time, he did not enjoy the same immediate success as the other great builders, such as Reb Chaim Melozhner and Sarah Schneer, and the Gedalim after the war in America and Eretz Yisrael. They enjoyed success pretty immediately. The Rebbeinu Shalom blessed their efforts. Rabbi Rice did not have such a wonderful experience in America. He eventually became the Rav again in Idchei Yisrael. They took him back as their Rav, and they promised him certain promises. By doing so, that they would be frumer and they would be more nizar in what he wanted. But a mere 6 months later, he was nifter. A writer, Reb Shmuel Singer, wrote an article about Rabbi Rice, and I just want to read to you a paragraph that it really struck me as something that was very, very important when speaking about Rabbi Rice. He writes, it would be equally wrong to conclude that Rabbi Rice's contributions to Torah in America had no lasting impact. Nurturing the growth of Torah life in a country is similar to planting a crop in a field. At first, the hard, unworked soil must be broken up by a plow and a hoe. Only then can the seeds be planted and the crop raised. Perhaps the effort of Rabbi Rice and his colleagues served to plow the hard, unbroken soil of America in preparation for the 20th century crop of Torah flourishing here. In this way, we can all be considered spiritual heirs of Rabbi Rice. And I think that that's so true. If we look around at the country as a whole, and the bracha from sea to shining sea, the yeshivas and the Torah, the Kohelim and the Beis Yaakovs, the chadarim, the svarim that are being published in this country, the shuls, the rabbanim. It's phenomenal, the growth. Who do we attribute this growth to? We have to go back to the very first person who planted the seeds in this country that broke the soil for us to make it much easier that in the 20th century there could box ice Torah. And that was none other than Rabbi Rice, whose yard site was today on the Bay Bayayim, this 150th yard site, which is a very significant number. And it's so significant that we're able to come together tonight to give him kavod. 150 years later, we're still acknowledging that he is the Balachsanya of Torah in America. It was not instant, but we have the foresight. We have the hindsight, rather, and also the foresight to be able to understand how when somebody does something with such mesiras nefesh and with so many bechiyas, together with his Eishes Chayil, under the hardest of conditions and the worst of climates, and he persevered in spite of all of the efforts to make him not persevere. That is something that is inspirational to all of us, and we all owe him personally Hakaras HaTov. To bring it home, this concept of changing a world and building a world, which was the title of tonight's lecture, I'd just like to add so that we can take something out of this. I always like to give a little bit of Tzedel Aderech, that we can take something personally away, besides for knowing the great history of your Kehillah and of your Zayda. Each and every one of us, if we have this dream to build and to change the world, it doesn't have to be as drastic a change as the Gedalim that we've spoken about this evening. Those are for Yechidim Mamish, very rare and very difficult for us to set our sights that high. But change, to affect change in the world, it doesn't have to be that big at all. If we set our sights on changing even a little bit and finding things that need to be filled, seeing opportunities in chesed, in tzedakah, in yeshivas, in Ben Adam L'Chavera, in Ben Adam L'Makim, things that are not being done. And we jump into the fray and we say, that's mine. I want to do that. I'm going to change a little bit of the world. That is changing the entire world. The great Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the father and the founder of the Musar movement, said the following Bart. And it's an amazing thing. I love this Bart. He says, when I was young, I wanted to change the entire world. When I got a little bit older, and a little bit more mature, and I saw that I wasn't able to change the entire world, that was too big a project, even for me. He says, I wanted to change my country. The country that I live in, I'll try to roll up my sleeves and fix the country that I live in. He says, that was too much. I wasn't accomplishing much on that front either. It wasn't doable. He says, then I said, you know what? Let's set our sights a little smaller. My community. I tried really hard to change my community, and I wasn't successful. Then I said, you know what? Chach, let me change my family. Change my mishpacha. Didn't work either. And then Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, so I decided then and there to change myself. I'll change if I can't do a big, big thing and change the whole world, or even change my family, I'll change myself. And that's what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter did. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he completely changed himself. That's Musar. Musar b'Yispailus. To change oneself by breaking your midas through the study of Musar and the absorption of the timeless words of the Musar Svarim slowly and letting it seep in. That was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's movement in Europe. He says, I changed myself, and you know something, a miraculous, amazing thing happened. When I changed myself, suddenly my family began to change for the better. And once my family changed for the better, my community started changing for the better. And my entire country then began changing for the better. and the entire world changed for the better. The ripple effect that we have in life, by small, slight, very subtle changes, we'd be shocked to know how we can affect the future. If we change ourselves, if we fix a little bad midah in us, or we see something that other people need. There's a person perhaps next door, neighbor of ours, that could use a little bit of help, either financially or emotionally or spiritually. Or if we're able to in any which way find a void in life and be tayo mishtayim al abayu shabbat until we have no choice but to jump in and try to fix that. If we could do that, we have no idea how we could personally change the world. The entire world would revolve around that one single aspect of chesed and of gvura that we have done. May the Rebbeinu Shalom bless us, that we should all find our calling, our own personal calling in life to change the world if we know it. May the great Rabbi Avraham Rice's sacred memory, whose efforts we behold clearly tonight here in Baltimore, an Irvein Yisrael, a city which the entire world knows for its Kedusha, for its Torah, for its Yiras Shamayim. May his neshama and his memory be felt in our hearts and in our minds. Ad bias Goyal Tzedek, B'mher V'Meinu Amen V'Amen. Thank you very, very much for coming.